and they were selling these blue staining bolete mushrooms. And they would say if you undercook them, you will see little people. It lasts, 3 to 7 days, in some cases weeks long. People are having these
Well,
experiences. So
after consuming
this,
the mushroom.
yes.
Wow.
It's
That's
not like
wild.
a few hours like psilocybin. One fellow said that he was eating lunch and that these little people started crawling across the rim of his bowl as he was eating soup. And then he would watch them jump into the bowl, go completely submerged into the soup, so like disappear, and then their heads would like pop up, and then he'd scoop them up with the spoon, and they'd stay in the spoon as he lifted it to his mouth.
Hello and welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. I'm your host, as always, James W. Jesso. This episode is going to feature an interview with Colin Dumnauer, ethnobotanist at the Dentinger Lab Natural History Museum of Utah. He discovered a mushroom that reliably induces Lilliputian hallucinations, effectively seeing tiny, hyper-realistic people 10 to 30 centimeters tall that appear in your environment and obey the laws of physics. Oddly, this is not a, sought-after drug. It's actually a widely popular food mushroom that you only experience these hallucinations if the mushroom is left undercooked. People are eating lunch at a hot pot restaurant, and then 3 days later, they're in a Yunnan hospital suffering hallucinations of little people everywhere. This phenomenon has been observed across 3 different cultures in different geographical zones, all who have had the same repeating experience. This points to something in the activity of this mushroom that reliably produces these Lilliputian hallucinations. Today's interview with Colin Dumnauer is going to explore this mystery, what we know and what we don't know about this popular food mushroom that causes us to see little people everywhere. Enjoy. Thank you, Amanterra, for sponsoring this episode. Amanterra is a credible source of legal psychoactive plants and extracts, most notably Amanita muscaria mushrooms. If you are personally curious to try some Amanita muscaria yourself, or you'd like to try any of their other products, you can check out Amanterra at jameswjesso.com/AMENTARA, Amanterra. If you use the promo code ATTM22, you'll get 22% off your first order. And now, here's the episode. Colin Dumnauer, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
So I became familiar with your work when an article you wrote for, I believe, the National Museum of Utah. Is that correct?
Natural History Museum of Utah, yep.
Yep. Went, I'm not sure how viral it went because we're all in our own little sort of algorithm reality bubbles, of course. But as far as my little reality bubble was concerned, a lot of people were very excitedly talking about this article you wrote on a mushroom that causes people to hallucinate little people. So that really struck my fancy and got me really curious, not just about the article itself, but to sit down and have a conversation with you. And I appreciate you being willing to jump on a call.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk more about it with you.
Now, before we get into that mushroom in particular, why don't you tell me a little bit about the sort of wider field of your work and research, a little bit about your background, and then how it is that you got into studying the ethnobiology of psychoactive substances, and maybe also include a little description of what ethnobiology is.
Right. So I've had sort of an unconventional pathway into this field. I spent most of my life in early college career studying astronomy and astrophysics, and then I sort of had a change of heart when I went on a camping trip in British Columbia, and I remember distinctly walking into that forest there and being overwhelmed by the variety and diversity of mushrooms everywhere. I think at that time I'd probably never even noticed a mushroom growing outside, and here they were in a really mind blowing abundance and diversity. So it got me really curious what these all were, what they were doing, what they might be used for, and it also was just really eye-opening that there's such beauty and diversity out in nature that I never recognized before. I think I'd spent most my time, in astronomy, pen to paper, sort of inside. So that felt really like something I wanted to pursue more. So then I started looking more into mycology, and that I suppose kind of naturally led into interest in magic mushrooms and more widely psychoactive substances. And so, in my last year as an undergrad, I did a voluntary honors thesis about the archaeology of some psychoactive substance in South America. And I just really loved it. I was fascinated by my growing understanding of how deeply rooted these psychoactive substances have been throughout history, and that there's a deep relationship between humans and mind altering experiences that I'd never really noticed before. And really was fascinated by how the sorts of things they were talking about and saying from the results of these experiences touched on the same sort of questions I was always interested in from a perspective of astronomy, these fundamental questions about really the nature of reality and our place in the universe. So it felt like a whole different doorway from the other side to answering these same questions. So that's sort of how I got interested in this field. The field of ethnobiology is, I guess, broadly defined as just the relationship between humans and nature, how people use plants, fungi, animals in a cultural context, either as foods, medicines, drugs, or even more widely as like building materials and arts and things like that. So it's a wide interdisciplinary field, but yes, I'm mostly interested in the psychoactive substances.
Hmm. And as a part of this, the evolution of your work and this interest, you came across, I'm not sure exactly how you came across this information, but you came across information about a mushroom that causes these very unique hallucinations. Let's start with the technical details. Now you can kind of lead us in with how you became aware of that this mushroom exists if you like, but I want to go with the technical details of like essentially what is this mushroom? What is the mushroom we're talking about? Where is it found in the world? What sort of ecologies does it grow in? What kind of mushroom is it? Like, is it saprophytic? Is that the right word? Mushroom.
Yeah.
The technical details of the thing.
Right. So I first heard about this in a undergraduate mycology course. The professor very briefly just kind of flashed this up on screen. It was a paper written by a well-known mycologist named David Aurora. He was writing about his travels in Yunnan, China in the 1990s. And he was saying it was just sort of an anecdotal paper about how he was interacting with locals at the market, and they were selling these blue staining bolete mushrooms. And they would say, if you undercook them, you will see little people. So he wrote about this, and the professor in the class I was taking at the time just mentioned how this fact, and said, well, nothing was really known about it other than these anecdotes. And so that really caught my attention. It sounded, I mean, at the time, I remember thinking this can't be real. It sounds like a fairy tale. And if it is real, then why do we not know more about it? This seems amazing. So, yeah, I quickly realized very little or no research has been done on the topic since that early paper. And at the time, we really didn't even know these fundamental questions. What species is it? What is it? Where is it found? What is its lifestyle? But in the past, I'd say 5 years or so, maybe 10 years, my research, along with others, has made a lot of good progress. So now we're fairly certain on the species that's causing this, because originally it was attributed to many different species of bolete mushrooms, which is a general term for a family of mushrooms that are easily distinguished by having like pores on the underside of their cap. But this family contains thousands of species worldwide. So it really wasn't known exactly what it was, but now we're fairly certain that it's a species called Lanmaoa asiatica. So it was described, actually originally described from a mushroom market where it had been being sold for decades, until science recognized it was actually a new species, which is funny. And that's actually not uncommon that people are selling and eating things that are undescribed species and about mushrooms. Um, but but yeah, it was thought to be endemic to Yunnan, China, which is the southwest province of China. And it is a mycorrhizal species. So most boletes, most mushrooms in this family are mycorrhizal, which means they form symbiotic relationships with host trees. So the mushroom, gets water and nutrients from the soil and its underground network, gives that to the tree, and the tree can give, in some cases, up to 50% of the energy it makes through photosynthesis to the fungus.
Wow.
So in that sense, the mushroom, or for that reason, the mushroom cannot be cultivated. It has to be grown with trees, and so for that reason, it's only been found and collected in the wild. So you really have to go to these places to get it. You can't grow it, or distribute it like psilocybin mushrooms, for example. And then just in the past few years, I heard about very similar reports of people eating a type of wild bolete mushroom from the northern Philippines. And they were saying the same exact sorts of things that people, after eating this mushroom undercooked, would experience these hallucinations of seeing little people. And I thought, that's really weird. I mean, this mushroom's thought to only be found in China. I wonder if it's the same thing or a different one causing the same effect. So I traveled there, and in working with the local people and collecting mushrooms in the field with them, and then bringing them back to our lab and doing DNA sequencing, we found it's actually the same species, Lanmaoa asiatica. So this is the first known record that it occurs in the Philippines, which greatly expands its range. Probably it exists throughout Southeast Asia. So, but now we know it's used in two different cultures, and they independently report the same exact hallucinations, which gives us a good, I guess, bolsters our confidence that there is some actual material basis to this phenomenon. It's not just a cultural act.
So tell me more about this experience. You're saying that they see little people. What is that? What exactly does that mean? What are? Can you like what's the terms I'm looking for? Can you give us like a general description of what people are experiencing? How big are these little people? Where do they see them? How real do they appear to be? And so on.
Right. It's really bizarre. So, but this is actually a known psychiatric condition that has been documented. Well, it was defined in the early 1900s, but it's been documented throughout human history. And so it's called Lilliputian hallucinations. And it's the perception of seeing an abundant number of little people, often 10 to 30 centimeters tall, in one's environment. And they are always described by people who have this syndrome as being rendered in exquisite detail. They're three-dimensional. They are interacting with real world objects and obeying the laws of physics, falling like from gravity or climbing up chairs and tables. And there's a lot of bizarre attributes they have, but what's interesting is they are remarkably consistent across different cases. So people always say they're colorfully dressed. They are described various ways in different cultures, of course: elves, clowns, fairies, dwarfs, harlequins. But they um, they're often described as being sort of amusing or amicable, but not directly communicating with the observer. And yeah, despite their consistency and this and how they appear to people, they can arise from a variety of different sources. So people who get the syndrome might be suffering from alcohol withdrawal. They might be having macular degeneration in old age. They might be having neurological diseases like Charles Bonnet syndrome. It's been reported from like almost 100 different causes, but
Wow.
it's not reliably reported from any one, except in this mushroom. It seems we finally have something that can reliably elicit this experience. So it remains unknown by psychiatrists and neurologists how this exactly works in the mind, the pharmacology of how it happens, or the treatment of how to treat it effectively, because we just don't know the mechanisms. But we're hopeful that perhaps a compound in this mushroom can be a real key window into understanding the mechanism of how this works.
Very curious. So, I mean, with this syndrome being, potentially arising from this huge spread of conditions, the next question I'm going to ask feels like it maybe makes more sense if we just sort of like, I mean, you can include all of that if you like, but it maybe makes more sense if we just think about it from the perspective of like the people consuming the mushrooms and having these experiences, which is that do people report these experiences being generally positive or generally negative? Like you said there, I can't remember how you said like whimsy or something. Like are these little people sort of, is it an enjoyable experience to interact with them of like wonder and awe? Or is it something like little demons? I'm thinking like Hieronymus Bosch and that one famous painting, these little demons everywhere. Or is it context dependent?
Right. I would say, at least in the case of China, it's described neither as something fearful to be avoided nor something awe-inspiring to be sought after. It is often recounted as an amusing experience. The people I spoke to all told stories with laughs and smiles on their faces, but it's not something they intentionally seek out or do recreationally. Now, that might just be a cultural attitude rather than a reflection of the drug itself. But it is worth mentioning also in the Philippines and in Papua New Guinea, which we haven't spoken about, but this phenomenon was also reported from the indigenous people in Papua New Guinea. In all those three cases, it was never something intentionally consumed. There's no like documented ritual or shamanic use of this mushroom. It's in all cases a very highly prized food. It's a very delicious mushroom. I have eaten it, and I could say it's very tasty. But it's the psychoactive effect is more of a occasional accidental side effect of undercooking it. So, I think we could get into the more of the symptoms, but one important thing worth mentioning is that it lasts, 3 to 7 days, in some cases weeks long. People are having these
Well,
experiences. So
after consuming
this,
the mushroom.
yes,
Wow.
it's
That's
not like a
wild.
few hours like psilocybin. So I think this long duration of action could be one reason why it doesn't have more recreational use. It is, I guess, a more um, I don't want to say challenging, but more of a serious undertaking to be affected for that long. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah.
And okay, so I have two questions. Okay, I'm gonna save the one that I had written down for in a minute. Are people when they come out of it? So obviously people know about this because it happens, accidental ingestion, and if it's lasting 3 to 7 days, do people come out of it disturbed by the experience, or do they eventually like acclimatize and like, oh, but there's little people as they just go about their normal lives? I guess like that ties into another question, like how like with it are people during this experience? If I think about like as a case example, psilocybin, totally different drug, right? But when I am and others I have spoken to, and the reports suggest that when people are on psilocybin, there's a headspace to that. You're not thinking the same way. You're not conducting yourself in the same way. It changes how you behave, right? In a way that, dose dependent and sort of individually dependent, can be quite a significant alteration in how you conduct yourself in your life, right? Like in some respects, even to a safety issue of maybe not realizing that you shouldn't be outside without your clothes on in the winter or something to this effect, not to make a trivial characterization. But when people are under the effects of this mushroom, are they seeing little people everywhere, but they're otherwise totally with their normal cognitive capacities? Or is there an alteration there that the people in the community or in the tribe know, like, oh, that's why he or they are just like wandering off, frolicking. They're he's with the little people or whatever. Like, how with it are people?
Right. So I'll first talk about from an outside perspective. So culturally, everyone really on all three of those cultures, China, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, people are familiar with this effect. It's not some obscure fact. It's well known. So when someone sees someone obviously affected by the mushroom, they kind of know that that's what's happening. But from a first person perspective, I mean, I can't say for sure. I've never had the experience myself, but from people I've talked to and read about that have, it sounds like I've heard both ways. It could be dose dependent. So I've heard people who are just like eating a meal and they see the little people walking across the table, but they keep eating their meal. And then I've heard people who are completely out of it. They stumble, sort of, or like someone else stumbles upon someone who's like totally delirious and having these effects and sort of in their own world. And so it could be dose dependent for sure. We don't have any idea about what the dose is. People are eating these mushrooms and who knows what quantities, and it's not really like regulated. There's not like a strict, dose, because it's all randomly consumed and used. So um, I suppose both ways, people can be more with it or out of it.
Hmm. And do people report that during the experience, when they're under the effects, they recognize what they're seeing is a hallucination? Or is there a sense that what they're seeing is real? I'm thinking in particular to like the tropane alkaloids contained in plants like datura. People are having, like, I'm having a conversation with my dead grandfather over there in the corner, and we're having a lively conversation. It's absolutely 100% happening. They are alive, and I'm in my living room, and it's a Wednesday. But in actuality, I'm lying on a cot somewhere in the jungle, and it's the middle of the night, and I'm just kind of holding myself, right? Or I'm sitting up, I'm talking to the air as far as anyone else is happening. In the example of the tropanes here, I'm genuinely convinced what I'm experiencing is real, like being in a non-lucid dream. Or I could have other experiences where, say on psilocybin, I'm seeing things happening. I'm like, I'm not certain that's real, even though I'm seeing it. Like, I can be aware that this is a visual hallucination or distortion of perception. Do people report being fully immersed in the reality of the hallucination, or are they conscientiously aware that what they're seeing, well, depends on the culture, I suppose, is the assumption of how real it is, but that they're aware that what they're seeing is a hallucination that isn't necessarily happening freestanding of their perception?
Right. So I think people, there's a lot of videos like on Chinese social media about these people who are experiencing this mushroom and they're like interacting with what appears to be the little people trying to pick them up and things like that. So I think they do seem, I mean, they're definitely appearing very real perceptually. They're, these aren't like amorphous, nebulous uh, figures. These are, like I mentioned, rendered in exquisite detail, very realistic and grounded in the environment. So they certainly appear real. And I think people generally, um, at first, think they're real because they appear to be so. But yeah, I think the knowledge that this effect can follow the consumption of this mushroom that is commonly eaten probably, alerts them to the fact that what they're having is a hallucination. Um, I mean, it's really hard to know exactly how they're feeling without, a detailed interview or
Right.
experiencing it
Hmm.
yourself. Um, I will say this though, so there's been several hundred people studied but in Yunnan hospital who have these effects after eating this mushroom, and they admit themselves to the hospital. And there's been some studies done, and they've looked at um, well, just observational, but then they also done some tests on like fMRI studies of people affected by this mushroom, and they have found lower um, changes in activity in the brain associated with like memory and language comprehension. And they concluded from that, as well as like a rudimentary test they gave these people, that they were cognitively impaired and considered delirious. So it does seem to be more of a deliriant, so to say, than like a um, classical psychedelic. But another study did write that people gave greater expression to inner thoughts and emotions. So maybe that is more similar to classical psychedelics. I think we're really at the very beginning of understanding the effects, and we can't really say anything for certain about characterizing what's happening. We don't even know what compound it is that's causing this. So there's a lot of unknowns, and again, just because this is something that's never intentionally consumed, we have no idea about the differences in dosage, or there's just so many conflating factors that just are not controlled. So it's hard to make any statements of certainty about what's going on.
Hmm. Now you said these little people are like in high detail, exquisitely high detail, and people are like picking them up, moving them in like I mean, even if I knew it was a hallucination, I feel at some point I'll be like, get away from my mouse. Like I'm trying to navigate my computer interface here. Um, but are they stable in the sense that if I look at, okay, say there's one on my desk and I like pick it up. I'm just an example. Obviously, we don't, you said there isn't robust research here. But if I say pick one up on my desk and say, go away, and I threw it and it followed the laws of physics and it went all the way over there, and I start working again, that if I were to go over to where I threw it, I would find the exact same little person like waiting there, I don't know, rubbing its knee or something. Like, is it that level of stable that it's almost as if once you're in its reality, that reality itself is fully stable, the way that if I were to go to the bathroom right now and you stayed on the call, I'd come back and it would be the same person waiting on the call?
It appears to be so. A lot of
Wow.
the cases that people have described to me, I'll just give some examples to demonstrate. So one fellow said that he was eating lunch, and that these little people started crawling across the rim of his bowl as he was eating soup, and then he would watch them jump into the bowl, go completely submerged into the soup, so like disappear, and then their heads would like pop up, and then he'd scoop them up with the spoon, and they'd stay in the spoon as he lifted it to his mouth. So they seem to be remarkably stable and
Wow.
embedded in the environment like that.
That is just
Um,
wild.
and it's not just one report. Like many different people have said this. Like in that David Aurora article, he was talking to a professor who was eating lunch at a place, and he said he lifted up the tablecloth and he saw hundreds of little people underneath the tablecloth, and then when he lifted it up higher, their heads would get stuck to the tablecloth and they would be dangling like that. So it's, again, I know nothing else like this where it's a sort of reality or environmentally embedded hallucination. It's not like a changing or in the same in a way that like many other visual hallucinations are.
I mean, even qualitatively different than a dream state too, which is constantly shifting, despite it constantly feeling real and as logical in one frame to the next. It being this constantly shifting mirage of things that once you're back to baseline or back to waking state, you're like, yeah, that made no logical sense at all. I did you watch the television show Common Side Effects?
Yeah, I did. I just recently got into that, like probably a few months ago.
Now, the reason why I rarely do I bring up TV shows on the show here, but it is for the listeners, it is in my opinion, very well done cartoon that appears to be very funny on the surface and is funny, but is actually quite a serious ordeal once you get into it. That explores the discovery of a mushroom that, when you give it to people, basically cures all diseases, even death. And it looks like a little blue mushroom, very akin to, slightly different, but very akin to, say, a Psilocybe salamenciata or a liberty cap mushroom with a extra little veil accent on it or something. And people have these experiences and so on and so forth. But so in every ways, it feels like it's coded as a psilocybin mushroom, but with this sort of it heals all disease issue. But then also when you take it, you see little people coming up out of everywhere. And there's some important aspect of the little people that you see are part of the healing. And then there's some interesting narrative development later as to that reality that they're in and blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't until I read your article that in my mind, I was like, oh, that's cute. They just took the ideas of psilocybin experiences and it is a medicine that can help, this broad range of conditions, and then like amplified it and put it in the context of considering the corruptness of the pharmaceutical industry. And then also added this fun idea that you can see little people, and realizing now that, oh no, there's genuinely this mushroom that has it that people have known about for a very long time that actively causes you to see little people. And so anyways, I bring that up because if listeners don't already know, is a very interesting show. And if you didn't already know, I felt like given the research you're doing, you would find it at the very least entertaining to watch this.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting question. I mean, I haven't spoken with the producers, but whether they got that inspiration from this psychoactive bully or something, this is a deeply held association, I think, across human folklore and mythology of associating diminutive beings with mushrooms. Why is this? We still don't know, but it's curious now that it appears we have discovered a mushroom which causes perceptions of little people. Yeah, fascinating.
Okay, I want to take a minute here and thank my patrons on Patreon. This podcast is funded by people like you. Yes, very periodically, there are some sponsors for some episodes, but what allows me to earn an income, to earn a living doing this podcast, this creative work, which is my full-time job, is people like you on Patreon. So thank you very much, patrons, for making this podcast possible for all of us. The people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube give significantly, and some of which for a long time, and their name in the credits are a special thank you to that. Their names are also in the description to this episode. If you were listening to this episode and you're finding value in it, consider sending me a little something. It could be signing up for a monthly pledge on Patreon. It could be tossing me just a little tip, like you would for a busker for a job well done. This podcast does require quite a lot of time and finances to maintain, both on the investment side of the hardware and the ongoing subscription fees necessary to produce and host a podcast over time. And again, the time that goes into producing these episodes. I'm a one-person operation here. I research, I find, I research, I record, I post-produce, I social media, I do all of it, and it takes a lot of time and, again, a lot of resources. So if you find value in that, even just a couple of dollars would be great. Even if you imagine it you buy me a cup of coffee for a job well done, consider it something like that. Links to do so are in the description of this episode. Patreon, if you're looking to either follow me for free on Patreon's not so toxic algorithm, or if you'd like to leave a monthly pledge there, or if you want to leave me a one-time tip donation through Ko-Fi or PayPal. And I really appreciate you doing so. I recognize that the world is a complex place financially and otherwise, myself included, and your decision to voluntarily contribute to the expenses of this show and to acknowledge my efforts in producing the show in that way, helping to make a podcast for all of us, is deeply, deeply appreciated. If you can't, that's all right. Please continue to enjoy the show. Those who can do, and we all get a podcast. All right, so that's it for my little Patreon support break. Let's get back into this interview with Colin Dumnauer. So it lasts for 3 to 7 days. Do we have reports of people being injured by this experience? I mean, specifically on the psychiatric side of things. Like, is it like 3 to 7 days goes by, the hallucinations wear off, whatever other cognitive effects kind of wear off, and they're like, well, glad that was over? Or do people have, is there any sort of case reports of long-term psychiatric changes, either for the positive, people feeling like it was deeply healing, or they learned a lot about themselves, or so on and so forth, or negative in the sense that sort of maybe a prevailing sense of derealization or cognitive deficits that prevail for a long time afterwards? Do we have any reports of long-term effects on one side or the other?
Right. So the best source of information for all this is again going to be coming from Yunnan Hospital. They've probably analyzed approximately 1,000 cases of people affected by this mushroom over the years, and everyone has recovered eventually. Now, the time frame for recovery can vary. Like I mentioned, it's usually around 3 days to a week. But they said there were some cases, I forget the exact percentage, but of people that it lasted weeks for. And I think they said in one case, someone had to be admitted to like a psychiatric ward for a few months. But I mean, that percentage is probably very low. The vast majority of people do recover. They don't appear to have any long-term effects. So they did look at, that study looked at vital organ function and damage both during and after, and they found no changes in either any like vital organs. So there's no like damage physiologically, it appears, at least to like the major like heart, kidney, liver, that sort of thing. And then there's also, of course, been no, well, not of course, but there's been no deaths reported from this mushroom. It's important to say. Um, so it appears to be, not super toxic in that sense, but the long duration of action is concerning. And again, we still don't know exactly the mechanism going on. As for the, you know, long-term positive effects afterwards, that hasn't been reported in the Chinese literature, but I think that might just be more of a cultural attitude because I think they don't, I mean, they're not using this for that purpose, and they might just be less inclined to report those sorts of things. Uh, this, I think, as you know, a big uh, condition in shaping the experience of a psychoactive substance is one's set and setting, as much as the drug is. So I think a lot of these questions about the effects and benefits or harms, uh, we shouldn't think of them as just being attributable to the drug itself, but it's going to be context dependent on the person and place and the way that they're using it. And so because this has only really been used in these East Asian cultures, which are very different from our culture, it's hard to say what differences the experience might have for folks like you and I.
Yeah, I think I don't know to what degree, because I very much enmeshed in the sort of cultural reality that I'm in here in Canada, but there might be some level of analysis bias of like, maybe because it's a drug in one way or another that they're not looking to report on positive effects. I don't know if that's the case, but I know that for quite a long time, even around here, like maybe one of the reasons why this mushroom wasn't well studied for a long time is that it's really only been in the last, 15 years, 20 years max, that the idea of 15-ish years, that the idea of researching and studying the positive value of psychedelic drugs is something other than career suicide for an academic. So maybe there's some of that too. This draws me to another question. So you're talking about the different cultures. There's three specific places that are known, right? This particular area in China. You said Papua New Guinea, is that right? And the Philippines. Now, I don't know and you're going to have to pardon the terminology here, it gets slippery, and I might end up saying things that come off kind of gross, but like, I don't know what the sort of the cultural worldview is there, or the degree of sort of like the global north modernity in the perception of what is real. Like, are these more like, is this in fairly modern cities in China and in the Philippines, or are this stuff is happening more in more traditional villages, right, that are less sort of like fully adopted to the modern scientific industrial materialist worldview? I'm asking this because is there a sense that in any of these three, cultural locations, that these mushrooms and the experience that are happening are reflective of aspects of reality? Like, is there a sense of like, oh, of course you see the little people because there are, for example, going back to say like a Celtic, I believe, like there are fairies, or various other traditions that would say there are such things as demons and there are this and that. Do these cultures recognize these experiences as being reflective of a deeper layer of reality, or are they all kind of seen as like, oh, that's a hallucination. You saw the little people, ha ha ha. Welcome back to reality.
I would say my understanding is that it's more of the latter. It doesn't seem to be embedded within certainly not a religious belief, but um, even more of a cultural belief system. It seems to be more of understood as a side effect of this mushroom. Um, Certainly in China, I mean, the places that I know it occurs are in major cities, but I mean, I haven't explored the more rural uh, villages. I mean, they probably are eating it. I mean, it's found throughout the province, and it's known they consume and eat wild mushrooms. So, um, and there's so many different ethnic groups in Yunnan. So again, looking at this from different cultural belief systems, we're probably still missing a lot, and there's a lot left to be discovered. In the Philippines, it is a very remote, small village in the mountains, and they know about it, and then they have a sort of folkloric word for these little people. They call them the ansasit, but there's not really a belief system around them that I know of. They could be, then they just haven't. I just don't know about it. But I will say they're also sort of reluctant to talk about it. They talk about them when they're drunk and more loose like that, but not. It's not something that's commonly discussed. And then in Papua New Guinea, it was reported that people affected by this mushroom would sort of start running amok and behaving wildly and going off on their own. And it was from the perspective of the other people in the tribe, it was seen as more just like a fearful thing, like this person's kind of gone mad. And so the anthropologists studying this dubbed it mushroom madness. So you can see just from, I guess, the language that it's not really a sort of communalized or ritualized substance. It's more of a phenomenon that is sort of on its own, and I don't think there's a belief system surrounding it.
Well, I think something that I'm thinking about right now is the saying of like, well, the genie's out of the bottle, and that is that if there's anything I've learned over the past 15 plus years that I've been involved in psychedelic culture and paying attention to the culture, and it's basically that there are a lot of people out there that are absolutely down. Like, they are ready to try the weirdest, most interesting, newest stuff, and they're willing to gamble it all to go far out on wild stuff and then get on Reddit and talk all about their experiences. So there is likely coming down the pipeline lots of anecdotal reports, I assume. Now that said, let's slide back to the sort of more institutionalized research. You said that there isn't an awareness of the pharmacology of this thing. There's no clear understanding of the compounds, the compound or compounds that's causing these hallucinations. There is some fMRI data. Do you, like, if you would say speculate, or if anyone is speculating, what could be the compounds? Like, are there specific compounds in these mushrooms that we don't know whether or not they're the psychoactive component, but they might be? Do we have a sense of, like, we don't know what entirely it's doing, but we know these areas of the brain are areas that are being influenced, and so there's a hypothesis or a speculation that it might be this mechanism of action? Even if speculative, is there a sense of what we might be discovering once we start looking into the pharmacology of these mushrooms?
Right. So, of course, this is all speculative. We don't have any hard leads right now about what it might be. Based off, this effects and the symptoms, for example, the long duration of action, and also something I didn't mention is the fact that after you consume this mushroom, it takes 12 to 24 hours before the effects of these
Interesting.
psychoactive effects begin. People do report some GI symptoms like 1 to 6 hours afterwards, but that recovers fairly quickly and doesn't seem to be too severe. But I think that long onset time could indicate that there is not a compound in the mushroom that's active, but something that's being metabolized in our body. And then after that whole metabolic process, it creates something that does have these psychoactive effects. Perhaps also it might not necessarily be something that's passing into the brain. Perhaps it's having a more peripheral effect, and that could explain the long duration of action. There's some research that's been hypothesizing, it's honestly beyond my expertise. I'm not like a neuropharmacologist, but suggesting that, metabolic damage in like the gut could actually influence perception in like the brainstem, and that you can have these sorts of um, peripheral activities that actually have psychoactive effects without anything actually crossing it into the blood-brain barrier. So I know this is just speculative. I mean, there's so many different explanations, but I would say the fact that it has such unique pharmacodynamics of the long, duration and onset suggests it's something interesting and different from what we currently know. And yeah, it's worth mentioning we've looked for psilocybin and ibotenic acid, which are the known psychoactive compounds in mushrooms. They're not in this mushroom. And so it is probably something new and interesting from a pharmacological perspective that could give new insight into understanding the relationship between our mind, body, and perception.
And just to clarify for the listeners, psilocybin would be the active compound in what we call magic mushrooms, ibotenic acid being the active compound in the Amanita muscaria, the red mushroom with the white caps. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if it was kind of wrapped up in there. You said the fMRI, there was fMRI data for people who are sort of suffering from this intoxication. Did they identified that certain areas of the brain associated, I think you said with language and something else, were compromised, but is there a clear sense of what areas in the brain specifically seem to be altered by this effect?
So I'd have to look more closely at the paper again. I don't know off the top of my head, but it appears that yes, the regions I remember with memory and communication were impaired, and then yeah, there's some heightened activity in some visual region which they said explains the the hallucinations, which I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more that is required to explain this phenomenon than having activity in one brain region.
For sure. Yeah.
But uh, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head actually the exact
No,
regions of the brain.
no problems. Let's take a short ad break here. Now, I have been interested in the Amanita muscaria mushroom for several years now, since maybe I was a kid playing Super Mario Brothers and seeing that interesting looking mushroom there. But for a number of years since I interviewed a woman named Amanita Dreamer back many, many episodes ago about the benefits of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. I've also interviewed another person, Baba Masha, on microdosing Amanita, and I've been curious about that too for quite a while. However, I never followed through because it seemed like the landscape was questionable as to the kind of supply I was getting, and I wanted to be sure that if I did try this, I got it through a reliable source. Well, I did, and I underwent my first microdosing protocol with Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and well, I'll make a video about it when the time comes, but the company that I got that Amanita from is called Emmenterra. I had such a positive experience with this company and with their products that I am, well, here we are with an affiliate arrangement, and they have sponsored this episode. If you are personally curious to try some Amanita muscaria yourself, or you'd like to try any of their other products, you can check out Emmenterra at jameswjesso.com/AMENTARA, Emmenterra. If you use the promo code ATTM22, you'll get 22% off your first order. Links to this are going to be in the description to this episode, as well as a reminder of the promo code there. But yeah, go check them out. And of course, hey, you know where the comment section is. If you try out their Amanita, I'd love to hear how it goes for you, so you can comment below. For the reports of the mushrooms causing perception of little people, right? When you went to these different areas where those reports are, you discovered that, well, okay, so it's all the same species, right? You had also said that this family of mushrooms, or that there are thousands of them, and that this sort of, I don't know if it's genus of mushroom, there's a lot of choice edibles in the midst of them. And I assume they are present in multiple different ecologies around the world. I mean, similar ecologies, obviously, because they're mycorrhizal, but in different locations around the world. Is there a sense that there might be more of these mushrooms, either that specific species unrecognized in different areas, or different species within the same genus or family that might produce these same effects, but are just yet unknown to the people where they grow?
Right. It's a really good question and something that I'm really interested in. So, to answer that, we first have to understand the diversity of species that are out there, which for mycology is often a very nascent science. There's still a lot of discoveries to be made about just knowing what species exist. We're still discovering new things all the time. So I've been doing a lot of work on that in my PhD. Sort of getting a global survey of all the species in this genus, and then doing full genome sequencing to understand all the relationships. Because if you understand the relationships, you can make more educated inferences about shared, chemistry, for example. So we've done that, and I've completed that, and it turns out the most closely related species to Lanmaoa asiatica is a mushroom growing here in the northeast North America. And it's called Lanmaoa pallidorosea, and it's commonly collected. And I've heard from many people who have eaten it, but there's been no reports of these sorts of hallucinations from it. So this raises an interesting question. Are are these mushrooms like actually hallucinogenic, but people are just overcooking them from that perspective? Or does this hallucinogenic compound, whatever it is, only exist in this one species in Asia? That would be sort of unique from a perspective, comparing to psilocybin or ibotenic acid. Those compounds are more widespread in many species. So um, it remains to be seen whether, this hallucinogenic bolete is whatever the hallucinogenic compound is shared between many species or just found in one.
Mm, wow. Yeah, it is a very curious question. The idea that it could be only this particular compound, or maybe it's an entourage effect of a series of compounds within the mushroom, that it would exist just in one species as well. I mean, even psilocybin, like the biosynthetic pathway that helps generate it it's across multiple genuses, I believe, through horizontal gene transfer. But I had also read a paper recently that said that some other species apparently just independently produced a different pathway to create the same molecule. And various psychoactive DMT, for example, is in almost everything. And then there's all these different examples of, I believe, caffeine as well is in different plants that produced it, developed the pathways to synthesize it separately, and that such a uniquely interesting hallucinogenic effect could be localized to just one particular mushroom is itself an incredibly interesting scientific discovery. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, so actually gets to a very deep and interesting question. Why these molecules that have these psychoactive effects in us are so widespread in nature? And what does it mean if something like this psychoactive bully isn't? So, our understanding of that is that these compounds are so widespread and have evolved multiple times because they have some ecological advantage, or they provide some ecological advantage to the organism, and so they're through natural selection they're highly valued from that perspective. If it didn't have a adaptive use, then and it wouldn't be so widespread. So perhaps whatever is in this mushroom, if it is only found in this one species, it might be that it's not really serving an ecological function. This is more of a curious side effects it has in human brains. But yeah, if we look at most, I mean, every other mind altering substance we find in plants or fungi, they have this effect in us, but they also have effects on animals or other organisms in the environment. And that is thought to be the reason why they evolved, is for that function, whether that's defense or attraction or something else. But yeah, like in the case of psilocybin, you're right. It's been horizontally transferred multiple times, but also independently evolved. So that suggests that it is serving some important use in the environment. Now, what that is, we still don't know in the case of psilocybin. But yeah, it's a fascinating question, understanding the why these things evolved, why they're so widespread, and I think it points to a deep interrelationship between organisms, and humans are just one of those organisms in nature.
Hmm. This also points to another question. You're talking about the different animals. Is that as far as I understand, we have no clear evidence that psilocybin-containing mushrooms are eaten by any other mammal than humans. In the case of Amanita muscaria, we have examples of different animals eating it. Reindeer being a famous one. I don't know how true that is, or if it's just an invention of somebody looking for an excuse to pretend like Jesus was or sorry, it's not Jesus. That's a different claim. That's Santa Claus is a mushroom. But I know I've seen images of foxes eating Amanita muscarias. And so do we have any reports of non-human animals consuming this it's pronounced bolete mushroom? Do we have any other evidence for that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Getting into the sort of the ecological role of this mushroom. Um, I definitely no reports. I'm trying to think from all the collections I've made of this in Southeast Asia, if I've ever seen one with like damage, like teeth marks from something like a squirrel or something. I don't think so. They seem to be usually intact. So, but I mean, who knows? I mean, there's not been much research or any research done on that question. So definitely something that warrants further study for sure. Um, but yeah, then like other mushrooms you find in the environment are like commonly damaged or almost completely eaten. Like porcini mushrooms, like Boletus edulis, that's one that's like notoriously always damaged by by something, either insects or animals. So yeah, it gets into an interesting question of why some mushrooms attract things eating them and others appear to ward them off.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess maybe if we don't find any evidence of any animals eating these mushrooms at all, we could maybe start to hypothesize that whatever compounds are creating these hallucinations have already so effectively worked as a defense against being eaten that it's pretty much king of the hill in that respect. Um, this is great. This has been super interesting. Very curious stuff. Are you still following this mushroom? Is this still your area of research that you're forwarding? And if so, what's next with this research? Do you or any teams you're involved with or teams that you know about have like next stage research to be done with this mushroom, either on the uh, ethnobiological or ethnocultural side of things, or on the pharmacological side of things, or what's progressing from here for you? And if it's not about that mushroom, what's progressing for you from here anyways?
Right. Yeah, I'm still very involved in this research. It's really been the focus of my PhD and hopefully long after as well. It's such a fascinating area of exploration that I think we're just beginning to step into. As much as we've learned, I think there's still so much more to explore, and it touches on so many different areas and fields of expertise. So, I've really focused, I think, on the more ethnobiological side and sort of genetics and genomics, understanding the evolutionary context of this mushroom and how it evolved, and sort of tracing the diversity and distribution of it, both across space but also cultures. And that's something I want to continue for sure. I'm sure there's other species out there, and that could give insight into how this compound, whatever it is, once we figure it out, how it evolved and how widespread it is. And also, I'm sure there's many more cultures out there that consume it and maybe even have some interesting knowledge or folklore about it that we've yet to document. I mean, the fact that it's that we're in the 2020s and we're just now learning about this is crazy to me. And so there's still so much out there to learn. I think next steps are definitely focused on trying to understand what this active compound in the mushroom is. And we've been working on that for a few years. And there's other groups like in China also working on it, but we haven't gotten to it. It's been really challenging. We've narrowed down the bioactivity to um, like a small candidate, small number of candidates, but to actually characterize them, we just need more material. So um, going back and collecting more mushrooms will be something of importance. But yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about that, but just testing these extracts in mice and noticing their behavioral changes has been really the method through which we've narrowed down on isolating a bioactive compound from the mushroom. Now, whether that bioactive compound is the same thing that's hallucinogenic in humans remains unknown. We'll have to figure that out. But I think once we can pinpoint um, an active chemical, if it is that simple, it might be more complex, like you mentioned, synergistic effects or something, some metabolite or something like that. But if we could understand what the chemical is, then we can start looking at a lot of very interesting questions in neuroscience, pharmacology, looking at the genome, seeing how it's produced, and then finding traces of that genetic pathway across many other mushrooms. And there's just so many different disciplines that this touches on that are honestly beyond my expertise, that I hope this awareness of this now, I think, uh, very fascinating topic reaches more researchers and gets more attention that it deserves. And then the last thing I would just say is the historical cultural use. is something I'm really interested in. How far back in time have people been using this or knowing about this phenomenon? You know, the first earliest missionaries in Papua New Guinea documented people eating this mushroom and having this mushroom madness. How many centuries or who knows how long were they doing that? In China, people have been collecting and eating this bolete for decades, maybe centuries. How long have they known about these little people? Has there ever been a traditional use or ritual use that's perhaps now been lost or is just yet to be discovered? There is one very old Taoist text that I found from the third century, and in it he writes that there's a flesh spirit mushroom that if you consume raw, you'll see little people and gain transcendence. Well, that sounds really intriguing, and maybe that is talking about the same thing. So there's a lot of fascinating questions about the how deeply embedded this is in human history and culture, and how influential it's been. We really don't know.
Wow, incredible. I wasn't planning on asking this question, but something that you just said brought it up. You're testing extracts on, or extracts are being tested on animals. That's how you're getting your short list or something. Is there a clear sense that whatever the compound or compounds might be are that they survive a drying process, or that they're more fat soluble or water soluble? Is that clearly identified, or is that still a mystery?
So the active, fraction that we found in mice was a polar compound, so water soluble. Um, but there might be other bioactive compounds in there that, I mean, I think it's a mistake to conflate a mushroom, which is an organism with thousands of molecules, and try and reduce that down to a single compound. I think there's a lot of complexity that we're missing in that approach. But yes, the one behavioral bioactivity that we've been following has been a polar compound. And then what was the other part of that question?
Whether or not whatever, like these effects, so whatever compounds are a part of that effect, that these effects are present, that whatever might be causing them survives a drying process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we do know that if you cook this mushroom long enough, it's safe and you won't have any of these effects. Restaurants in China typically set a timer for 15 minutes if you're like having a hot pot, for example, with this mushroom, and they say don't eat until this timer goes off, but you'll see little people. But if you eat after, if you cook it long enough at a high enough temperature, whatever the compound is will break down. So it is definitely heat sensitive. The mushrooms that I got and collected in China, I freeze dried immediately. They were fresh, and then I freeze dried them to preserve the chemistry. And then I immediately made extracts from those. So, yeah, they are heat sensitive and will break down upon cooking for sure. But beyond that, I don't think we know much about the compound.
Awesome. Okay. So that all said, again, Colin, super interesting. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Really looking forward to seeing how your work progresses from here and learning more about this mushroom, both through your work and through, it hit some sort of cultural hotspot to get so popular, a couple months back on social media. Maybe it's going to find its way into sort of a cultural movement somewhere down the line, and we'll get information from all sorts of different places. But nonetheless, very interesting stuff. Excellent work. Thank you so much for being on the show. If there's anywhere you'd like to direct the listeners to either follow your work, or if you are a part of a particular lab you'd like to direct them towards, or any way that they can follow you, learn more about your stuff, or support what you're doing.
Right. So I am on Instagram at eating_Gaia. And I post some updates about my research there from time to time, and just random mushroom photos. So if you're interested in mycology generally, you can follow me there. And yeah, check out the Dentinger Lab at the Natural History Museum of Utah if you're interested in pursuing more research in this field. And yeah, like you said, I think this has definitely gained a lot of cultural attention, which is great to hear, because when I first heard about it, I was perplexed why it wasn't more known and interested by the public. So hopefully this attracts more research and attention so we could learn more about this deeply fascinating phenomenon.
Okay, I'll make sure links to those are in the description of this episode. Colin Dumnauer, thank you so much for coming on to Adventures to the Mind.
Absolutely, James. Pleasure to be here and talk with you. It was fun.
And cut. Okay, that was my interview with Colin Dumnauer here on Adventures Through the Mind, episode 208. I hope you appreciated what you heard. If you want to follow up with Colin's work, say read the article we discussed or any of the other things that he mentioned there at the end, links to those will be in the description to this episode wherever you're checking it out. As you heard in the middle there, support for this podcast comes from you, the listener, via Patreon and voluntary donations through PayPal or Ko-Fi. Financially, this is an absolutely essential part of maintaining this podcast because although there are periodic sponsors, this show does not rely on sponsorships to produce something for you to enjoy. If financially supporting the show is not available to you to do so financially, I should say, then there's always the option of leaving a comment or a like or a positive review. Any kind of engagement does help the algorithm know that people care about this show and helps people who don't yet know that they could care about this show find the show, helps it gets to their eyes and ears. So please engage the content in that way. Also, genuinely, if you got something to say about it, I'd love to hear it. I do pay attention to the comments and I do reply to most of them. So hit me up there on Spotify or elsewhere and leave me a positive review. Would love that. You could also subscribe to the show on whatever podcatcher you prefer so that you are aware when new episodes come out. Please do that. Most people who listen aren't subscribers, so you can be one of the lucky few that are subscribers and listen to the show, not just one or the other. If you want to follow me, release short clips from this episode or these episodes on Instagram, ATTMIND podcast, @Mind Podcast on Instagram. And I'm on the other social medias. Ultimately, I think social media is sort of toxic. Surprise, surprise. I'm sure I'm not breaking the intellectual bank for you there to say that. So I'm not on there too often. I prefer to release things through an email newsletter, which you can sign up for, through Telegram, basically things that don't rely on algorithms and sort of attention baiting to get you to see them. Those are also listed in the description, but follow me whatever way you're naturally inclined. And I appreciate that you listen to this episode all the way to the end. And I mean that genuinely because it is no guarantee in the world, in the constant deluge of content, and only a fraction of that being worth your time, and an even shorter fraction of that being able to hold your attention for the entire duration of anything longer than apparently at this point 3 minutes. Wow. If you made it all the way to the end here, it is truly an honor to have had your attention for that long. So thank you very much. And until the next episode, I've been your host, James Gesso. Take care and stay curious.